All right, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. My name is Mohammed. I work here at LUMS, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to, I think this is the 18th session of the Leaders at LUMS series. And I think we started it, 2 years ago or so? Longer than that. And the idea behind starting this is so that the young people here, the students, get a chance to meet accomplished, seasoned, experienced leaders and get them to share their life story, their professional journey, so that they can imbibe some of the lessons that they had during their journeys, and also ask them questions about what leadership is like. And so that's why we are here today. We are very grateful that we have with us a distinguished international leader, Zain Hak. He's Global Vice President for Agriculture and Forestry in Royal Dutch Shell. He also wears another hat, which is he's chairman of the board of Shell Pakistan Limited. So he's very much homegrown, but since then he's had quite a diverse journey. He went to a liberal arts college in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. From there, he went to Cambridge to the Judge Business School. He joined Shell. He's done pretty much every job in Shell, what I saw on his CV, and worked in pretty much every country. But a few to share with you. He worked in Pakistan, he worked in Vietnam, in Singapore, in Switzerland, in the UK, in the US. And I think as part of his brief, he covered many more regions and markets. So he's here with us today, and we are going to talk to him about leadership and any other questions that you might have on your mind. We want to make it interactive, informal. We'll check with him what his comfort level is, whether we want to leave questions to the end. But in the meantime, let's give him a nice, warm LUMS welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Good to have you. And we were talking during the pre-meeting we had before, and we discovered a bit about you and the kind of work you do, but for the benefit of this audience, I thought we could start at the logical place, the beginning. So tell us about the beginning, share with us your early years.
So, Assalamu alaikum and thank you. Great to be here. It's such a privilege. Perhaps the right place to start for me is that, as a Pakistani, coming to LUMS and seeing what LUMS does is very inspirational. I've been a big fan of LUMS for many years because I've worked together with a lot of LUMS alumni and really world class. So it's a privilege to be here. I grew up in Karachi.
Okay.
My schooling was...
Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect, yes. You have to be somewhere. I was at the grammar school.
Oh, and, you have something in common then.
Yeah, there you go.
Any other grammarians here? No.
Well, there's
Okay.
one there, yeah.
Oh, one there.
What house were you in?
I was in A-levels, so
But you still must have had a house.
we could decide on our own, but I don't really remember it right now.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So that was my schooling. My O-levels and A-levels were all
Okay.
in Karachi. And then I went to study in, as you said, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And
why Iowa? That's a relative backwater of the world. Why not Stanford or Wharton or somewhere like that?
Well, that's an easy answer. Why not
Okay.
Stanford?
All right.
But the reason that I went to liberal arts, I chose to go to liberal arts college.
Okay.
One of the and the other reason I chose Iowa was actually at that time. This is in the late 80s when you were applying for scholarships. The liberal arts colleges in the Midwest used to give very hefty and very it was easier to get scholarships.
Okay.
But more importantly, I chose to go to this institute because I wanted to do a multidisciplinary. So I did a lot of economics and mathematics. And now when I look back upon it, it was operations research. So I mean, that is really what I really, but at the same time, I loved the classics. So I loved English literature, history. And this was the only college that allowed me to actually have this entire spectrum of education and actually have a multidisciplinary, truly liberal arts degree. At the time, this was the biggest reason for choosing it, and the choice was between the East Coast and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So it was quite a
Quite a
drastic choice,
contrast.
quite a contrast.
ये बताएं कि ये जो choice होती है of undergraduate institution, how critical is it for the future? Now looking back,
एक हवाले से ये बहुत क्रिटिकल है, दूसरे हवाले से ये क्रिटिकल बिल्कुल भी नहीं है। और जिस हवाले से ये क्रिटिकल है वो ये है कि because I mean when you are surrounded by people and faculty that can really imbue in you a love of learning and really test you on at a time when this is your formative phase, they can really train your mind. So it of course becomes very, very critical. And very early on, you get to also compete. And it's not about competition, but you get to compete because we're all competitive beings, and we really sort of train our mind and finesse it to at an institute like LUMS and like Stanford or any of the other institutes.
right?
जिस हवाले से ये बिल्कुल क्रिटिकल नहीं है, वो ये है कि when we look at life in general, and if you'll allow me to be a little bit philosophical about this,
Please.
How successful we are is a very it's a fungible question, and we decide how successful we are, and people who are who come out from all sorts of institutes, and sometimes who've not even been to institutes, they'll be very successful. So really, I mean, the answer is it's not an easy answer, but somewhere in the middle is where the truth lies.
Okay. So I'm going to also be a little philosophical.
Please.
And so ये हम सुनते हैं conventional wisdom के जी leaders are born, they're not made. So as you were growing up and then through college and Cambridge, were there any early signs or indicators that you had some leadership क्या कहते हैं जरासीम या traits?
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, conventional wisdom, if that is to be believed,
right.
Leadership, if leadership is about being extroverted, and by the way, I'm just going with conventional wisdom because I've got a different definition of leadership, but
okay.
if it is the definition of being the classic sort of,
right.
A-type, extrovert, Habesha, a people's person, then yes, I mean, I did have some early germs.
Okay.
I was a big sports person. I was a sports captain.
Debater?
Yeah, that's right.
Debater.
I enjoyed this. I enjoyed theater. I enjoyed all of these things we had to do. But I also think that, I mean, leadership, where there are some innate qualities that are there, and perhaps we can come to that later. I think that, I mean, there are certainly things that can be trained and inculcated.
So learned skills, but some DNA is nice to have.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, many of us, as we've grown through our careers, even starting from an early age, we haven't been operating in isolation or developing in a vacuum. So we've had people around us, networks, family, friends, relatives, coaches, mentors. What was it like for you?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I've had role models and mentors, officially or unofficially, since I can remember. There were people I looked up to, and I learned a lot from other people. I learned a lot from other people's successes, their failures, their development, and I think that's the only way. जिंदगी बहुत मुख्तसर है, और इसके अंदर आप हर चीज़ को experience नहीं कर सकते. So the best way to learn is actually through other people's data points. And what and by the way, obviously you have to take it with a pinch of salt because no two situations are the same, but you can learn so much from that and very quickly increase your own muscularity. ये एक बाय द वे although आपने सवाल ये पूछा नहीं है बट मैं क्योंकि मैंने मस्कुलैरिटी का नाम लिया है I'll
मैं
tell you
पूछने लगा था कि इसका मतलब क्या है।
because you gave me this quizzical look. You know, I don't know how many of you are sports people here, or you know, the way that the human body develops is actually through progressive overload. You know, so जितना ज़्यादा वजन उठाएंगे उतने आपकी muscularity develop होगी. And you know, in this, your management career is no different. The bigger the loads that you lift in your management career, and the more compound movements. So, the compound movements are squats and deadlifts and pull-ups, and the other isolated movements are the bicep curls, right?
Okay.
So bicep curls करने का फायदा है, लेकिन इतना फायदा नहीं है जितना squats or deadlifts or pull-ups का है, because these are compound movements. And what I found was that, and one of my early mentors, I was based in Multan. That was one of my early jobs, and he was not he was a civil servant. He actually gave me this advice that you know, do these difficult. मैं क्या था यार, मैं इधर कराची मैंने अप्लाई किया था जॉब के लिए, और I don't know, actually not in Multan, it was Dera Ghazi Khan. And I said there's some glitch in HR क्योंकि पता नहीं मैं तो कैसे पहुंच गया.
They don't know how to spell.
That's right. At that point, the assistant commissioner, he was an assistant commissioner, he gave me this piece of advice, and he said, you know, do these squats and deadlifts very early in your career, because they will return the biggest muscularity to your management muscularity. And that is, since then, I've always felt that just like the human body development, our muscularity, our management muscularity is also. So that was an early mentorship.
तो डेरा गाजी खान का कोई हमें स्क्वाट्स का एग्जांपल दे ना, ताकि हमारे जो यंग लोग हैं यहाँ, ये जब ग्रेजुएट करते हैं तो ये भी या दुबई जाना चाहते हैं या बाहर जाना चाहते हैं. Nobody wants to go to, how many want to go to Dera Ghazi Khan and start their first job there? Nobody.
Interestingly, one of your valedictorians, I was just watching a fantastic documentary who was 2019, 2020, the valedictorian. And he Multan के करीब एक जो, so he went back, and
he went back.
There's a number of people who've contributed. But you know, I'll tell you what the squats and deadlift, अमूमन ये होता है कि हमारी जो earlier part of the career है, it is dominated by hardcore and analytical or frontline roles. And those are the roles that I also did. I mean, I was a territory manager. At that time, we used to call it a field officer or a sales officer. I did production management in Mayal and Dhurnal, जो कि north हैं, oil fields हैं, and other such, you know, depot management in places like Vihadi. And the biggest learning over there, of course, is that how do you function in an environment that perhaps is very new to you. But the other thing is to also know yourself, because you really get to know yourself in these sorts of positions. Later on, I was posted out by Shell to places like Vietnam, which again, चले पाकिस्तान में तो फिर हम फिर भी बोली बोल लेते हैं. Vietnam में तो it was my wife, and my three very very young children over there. And in these sorts of places, everything that you've taken for granted, suddenly you become very conscious of.
Right.
And all your sensibilities are heightened, because everything is in a state of flux. आपका कोई network नहीं है, आपके पास शामों को आपने क्या करना है, weekends पे
खाना क्या खाना है.
So it really taught me early on about how to navigate in a very different and difficult environment, and really helped me later on. So ये आराम से progressive overload जो मुल्तान डेरा गाजी खान में शुरू हुआ, वो then later on I went to Singapore. Singapore was an easier place.
Much easier.
Vietnam was a difficult one. I worked in Africa a lot.
Okay.
I worked in Latin America a lot. So that really came to my rescue.
और resilience, I guess, was something that you were developing. वो जो आपने muscularity की बात की थी, I was going to translate that as resilience as well, which is, I guess, a prerequisite to, you know, rise up in the hierarchy.
That's absolutely right. You know, the other thing is about आपने leadership की बात की, And that was interesting. You know, I've thought a lot about this. I've even questioned, कि भाई, what's a good leader? Am I a good leader? Should I be a leader? What imbues, you know, what are the qualities? But another way of looking at this, and especially because, I mean, a lot of you are MBAs and you want to be in the corporate, and you'll be, and it's business administration. मुझे याद है when I was growing up, तो लोग कहते थे कि भाई वो कैसा, and a lot of my family was actually in you know, in the government, associated with the government or the army, etc., etc. So वो कहते थे कि वो बंदा कैसा अफसर है? कहते थे बड़ा दबंग अफसर है, किसी की नहीं सुनता. I used to say, really? किसी की नहीं सुनता? That means he's a good afsar, and by definition a good leader. That doesn't sound like a very good leader. And I think that the definition of leadership has also changed, and within that it's such an interesting that anything taken to its extreme becomes counterproductive. So for example, if somebody is a decisive person and they are over decisive or किसी की नहीं सुनता, it becomes, she becomes an autocrat. If somebody is a diplomatic person and they can bring about consensus bearing, they do too much of that, they become appeasing, right? So anything taken to its, and there's so many examples that you can all think about. So I mean, the word is balance.
और archetypes इतने बन गए हैं. एक तो आपने बताया the megalomaniac leader, दूसरा जो the authentic, या दूसरा एक है the servant leader.
Absolutely.
उसके बारे में आप बताएं जरा. Do you believe in that? Have you had opportunities to practice that in your career?
So I think that if I could define my own approach to leadership, actually it is about servant leadership.
Okay.
And I think that that is where all aspects of that concept apply. I've tried to apply it. I've not always succeeded. And I still keep on trying to inculcate those sorts of functionalities in my behavioral imperatives that allow me to become a better, you know, catalyze. I mean, the best leader is that, somebody once said that, you know, the best leader is that if you walk into a room and that room is trying to work on a statement, you know, on a problem, I shouldn't be able to tell who the leader is in this. That to me is the most fluid definition, and you know, that's the way that I would like to really be a part of teams. Whether I'm a leader or considered a leader or a follower, whatever it is within that, or a team player, I would like to be a part of that sort of team. And I even take it one step further, and I tell my own team that, because many team ke andar there is a legal head, there's a marketing head, there's an operations head, and I tell them that when there's a moment of crisis or something, and if somebody was to walk into this room, nobody should be able to tell which function do you belong to, because we all are working on one fundamental issue, and that's the problem statement, that's the objective statement.
That needs a really sophisticated enabling environment and like-minded people, doesn't it? And that in itself is a challenge.
So like-minded, aapne badi interesting idhar baat ki hai, and that is a challenge, no doubt. I think part of the thing is to surround yourself with people who are not like-minded. And within this, so for example, I said early on, you know, I've taken the Myers-Briggs many times. I've never liked the outcome. I've taken it 5 times and tried to affect it. Hamesha wohi nikalta hai. So I think I've resigned to my fate. But I think that if my profile is ENTJ, for example, right? And I realized in my earlier part of my career in 2002, I used to work in a refinery in Singapore. I was an economist for the refinery. I used to do economics and scheduling, which is a very operational, yet a very, I don't know how many of you are math majors here, but there's a lot of linear programming, multivariate programming that is done. And at that time, up to बहुत sophisticated हो गई, तब तो it was a little bit old-fashioned, you know. It's a
simplex algorithm hota
simplex algorithm, exactly right. So we used to use a lot of that. And I went to a management program, and Shell had said, we want to see how we used to call it the mid-level leadership program. And after 3 months of intensive looking at my management style, they basically came up with a lot of red flags. And one of the red flags was, they said, you've hired all the
bang
people.
about.
But they said, you've hired most of the people like yourself. And that is a big problem. And वाकई मैंने जब इसके बारे में सोचा, I was like, I mean, this really is a very big problem.
Yeah.
Because there was nobody in the team to really alert me to my own blind spots. And as a cohort, we were going to drive the ship over the abyss unknowingly, even with the best of intentions. And over there, I realized that we need to be, we need to hire people and be a part of teams where there's a real diversity of thought process. We talk about diversity in gender, which is very important. We talk about diversity in many other, but there are some things which are under the waterline. And this is one of them, right? I mean, how introverted is a person? how
बिल्कुल
extroverted is a
मतलब
person.
monolithic सा culture बन जाता है.
Exactly right. Sorry, I'm just going to take this.
So this is a good, I think, opportunity to take a short pause and get the audience involved as well, because we've discussed already like personal issues about your life, career growth, etc. I would like to invite particularly the students, if you have questions or you want to push back at Zain
Please
on
do.
any issue, just identify yourself, your program, and frame a short and succinct question. Any takers? Anybody in the front rows? No? Alums? There we go. And identify yourself.
I'm Hamad. I am undergrad 2011.
Okay.
PhD economics and mathematics. Yes. Thank you. Is it audible?
Yes, yes.
My question is, when you said masculinity and deadlifts, you were the TM at that time. Your first job was that. What different you were doing from other TMs that like आपको उसने वो तरक्की दी? Because I think there are like 36-40 TMs जो से उस होते हैं, but not all TMs are sitting where you are sitting. So exactly what difference did you do as steps?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that question. Well, I mean, I think मेरे ख्याल में कि everybody works hard. Sometimes there is a plan. Sometimes you have a plan. Sometimes there's happenstance. Things happen, and you are either in and there's a whole spectrum of things that can happen. I think one of the things that I've done many things which have not been good, but I mean some of the things that I think I'd like to draw out, which I did well, was number one was being very clear that I took roles that were close to the external customer, which was important. And number two was do roles which others didn't want to do always. So I mean, if somebody said that, Zain, do you want to do this job, and nobody else would do it or could, anyway, nobody else is willing to do it, that really gives me an adrenaline rush. And there were times that I volunteered for roles which were otherwise considered difficult. और इसके अंदर एक risk-taking appetite भी थी. I'll tell you one thing that I've realized is that if you don't fail from time to time, and we come back to this, you're not taking enough risk, because you must fail. Because I mean that's how you're the edge. You're a math guy. In the data process, you have to keep on using data till you fall off the cliff, because you've mapped out the edge of the cliff. You won't do it again. It's like a video game. You don't actually fall off the cliff, but I mean you start again. But at least then you've mapped out. आपने अपना दायरा असर जो है वो map out कर लिया. And then within that allows you over time to say that this is my strong suit, and this is what I will play at, and this is what I need to do more of, and this is what I do less of. Because again and again, there are choice points. You need to make choice points, and they become more and more difficult. It'll be difficult to make these choices. When I was Vietnam ki baat kar rahe the, after Vietnam, I came back to Pakistan, and a lot of people sitting in the room worked with me at the time as well. And then again, I left and went to Switzerland. That was that might sound like it was a great place to live, but it was a choice point because it was a risk. The role I was asked to take could very well not have existed 2 years from then. And I knew that. It was, but I took it because I also knew that if this goes well, the upside is much more than the downside. This could catapult me into another role, which could be and mercifully it worked. There was a chance it wouldn't have worked, but there was a risk-taking element over there, which is also important. Calculated risk.
So you're risk friendly.
I think so.
And also you're preempting some of my questions, which
I'm
is
very
not
sorry.
good. But anyway, the other thing you mentioned, आपने जिक्र किया happenstance.
जी.
और actually had a question around that, क्योंकि कुछ लोगों के आप careers देखते हैं और CVs पढ़ते हैं तो you think, ooh, what a linear career trajectory. और आपके केस में भी ऐसा ही था या was it more zigzag and circular, and what if it was, what were like the key inflection points that carried you all the way?
It was I mean, to answer the question, it was zigzag. I think that the key inflection points were. So before I answer that, I'll tell you. I mean, and there's a couple of you sitting in the room who've heard me talk about this over the last 20 years or so. In a company, if you're in a global multinational, it's quite a broad playing field. And of course, because of the global nature, there are different geographies, and everybody wants to be promoted. But if you want to be promoted in the same function, let's call it that it's complexity of 1. If you want to be promoted and you want to be in a different geography, let's call it exponentially more difficult to the power 2. And if you want to change function, so for example, when I went from refining to trading to marketing back to LPG to etc., changing functions, make it 3, right? Okay. So if you want to change a function and geography and be promoted, you are actually in a very complex environment.
Okay.
I think that एक तो वो होता है कि भी आपने do you want to take this complexity, and the second thing is that if you have whatever complexity factor that you take on, how are you prepared for it?
Isn't that a small field of aspirants then, with those 3 levels of complexity?
It could be.
Okay.
But I will tell you that in the initial part of the pyramid, it's not that small, because people are waiting to, unless you want to be a subject matter expert, unless you say, I'm a lawyer, I want to always be, and I mean, I want to be head of legal of this company. Then it's a different sort of thing, right? But if most people are going to be MBAs or coming out with degrees which are broader or liberal arts degrees, chances are that they will want they would want a multivariate career.
And I think this is, I mean, guys, any questions around this? As you think of after you graduate, you're going to face this dilemma. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Muzammil. I'm working with LUMS in Housing Executive Development Center. My question is, when it comes to learning from others, so you said you have learned a lot from others as well. So is there any specific framework or model you used, or is there any parameters? Because when it comes learning from others, there's a lot of data coming from by talks, by incidents. So is there any personal framework you use कि मैं इसको थोड़ा सा streamline when it comes to bottleneck? So what I want to learn, और जो data मेरे पास आ रहा है, how you can refine from that data और उसको जो आप सीखना चाह रहे हैं?
Ji, thank you for the question. What faculty are you from?
I'm working with LUMS and Housing Executive.
All right, okay. No, thank you for the question. So, I think that learning के हवाले से there are 2 types of learnings. There's functional learning and there's behavioral learning. What I find is that functional learning actually happens either through your functional department if you're in the university, or on the job with hardcore, manuals, working at the job, looking at things and there's a lot of learning. That's the easier thing. And what I also find is कि और ये एक Asian tendency थोड़ी सी होती है, and of course Pakistan is part of Asia, that if you ask somebody that you get a free course, what sort of course would you want to do? And I've tested this many times. There'll be a computer science graduate, but they will choose a computer science course. I've never understood that. Free pick, what course would you do? I'll do more of computer science. Math major, I'll do even more math. And so एक तो वो है, and the other thing is that behavioral side के ऊपर there is very little learning. That is the more difficult thing. Now, and behavioral thing talks about some of the aspects of leadership, right? Or talking about how do you conduct yourself in communicating? How do you negotiate? How do you negotiate across cultures, right? How do you lead a team through crisis? What if that team is not from your home country? What if it's a national team and you're managing it virtually? These are all behavioral imperatives. And the only way to do this is to actually observe. Observation is a very powerful tool. And the second thing is to imagine yourself in that situation. What we say is that you must never react to a situation. You must always respond. And the only way to respond to a situation is if you have mentally thought about that many times before. When you go into that. So functional, behavioral, functional, I talked about behavioral, imagine yourself, observe, discuss, this is the way. But please do not confine yourself to your functional. Life is too short to just study your own subject.
Thank you. Ji, go ahead.
This is Abdul Rafi. I am a finance practitioner and a professor by passion. So I would like to ask one question that would you like to share any specific business decision that failed miserably? And
यार आप भी मेरे सवाल यूज कर रहे हैं.
what was your learning curve for that specific business decision? Any specific business, what we say?
Lessons from failure.
Lessons from failure. Yeah. No, it's आपका भी ये सवाल?
नहीं, मेरा भी यही था, मगर वो उन्होंने पूछ लिया, अब मैं दोबारा तो नहीं पूछूंगा.
Lessons from failure, there are many. There are
But specific business decision, any specific business decision?
specific business decision.
Product failure or decision failure or HR failure, any other, any failure.
उसको anonymize कर देना, ताकि
Anonymize,
बाकी
ये
shell
वही
वाले
सोच रहा हूँ.
पहचान ना लें.
No, I don't want any legal cases on my hands.
Classified information, ignore it.
No, it's a good question. So let me put it this way: that I mean, there were many times that decisions were taken where I perhaps did not. Actually, many times what happens is that when you are bidding for things, or you're trying to form a joint venture, or you're trying to acquire another company, this is where the difficult decisions come, because you have to say that, okay, here is the NPV of your finance. Here's the NPV of this company, and this is what I want to do business with, or whatever. You somebody lowball it, or you highball it. I mean, so I think that there was a lot of learning over there, that how do you balance out. So I mean that there are many examples in that I learned from, and I continue to learn from. There was I remember going to Vietnam. Choice of business model was a big failing of mine. I really learned the hard way on that, and I had to course correct and change our approach over there. But iske andar, I think the important thing to remember is that back to the learning question, that how do you inculcate from that learning? How do you actually learn from that? What also happens is, मेरे साथ ये बहुत होता है कि, I mean, once you don't even want to think about that, because it is such a blow to your ego, and it is so. There's PTSD associated with these things. It's so traumatic. You don't even want to, but you must address it. You must talk about it to yourself, or your spouse,
or your shrink.
Or your shrink. Not to your boss. That's a bad idea. But yeah, so these are some of the.
So that's, so thank you for being so candid. But part of this session, I think for us, it's a window into your personality and your career. And I hope it's a mirror for you, right? And on that note, I would like to lower the tone a bit and ask you, what's it like a week in the life of Zain Hak? Now you're this global business executive. Like, what did you do last week?
Yeah. So obviously, as you go through your career, it evolves, right? Your days
Changes,
evolve.
yeah.
Earlier part of your career, again, some of my colleagues here will remember that I always talk about three buckets. I say that initial part of your career, 90% of the time you're doing hardcore analysis, right? That
Okay.
you're doing more and more analysis, da, da, da. And then in the middle part of your career, as you after the first 7-8 years, generally, you go into the next box, which is managing resources, right? So you're managing people, you're managing budgets, you're doing some of the analysis, but then you're handing over about 30% of your time is analysis, 60% of the time is managing resources, 10% of the time is doing strategic vision or helping with strategic vision. And the third and final box is building strategic vision. And about 60% of your time is doing that. You're a bad manager at that level if you're doing analysis all the time, because there are other people to do it and you have to trust your teams. And by the way, that's another whole different subject about delegation and learning to trust teams and going through that, but I won't go there. In these three boxes, depending on where you sit, the day would evolve. I'll tell you, currently, a lot of my role is divided into two parts. Number one is performing the business performance, what are the strategic imperatives, delivering on the bottom line, delivering on safety, delivering on production. I've got a production-oriented business. It goes from acquiring feedstock, manufacturing, selling, marketing, all the way through customers, through JVs, partners, etc. So that's performance part of it. But there's a second part of this, which is transform. So perform is there, and transform has a lot to do with innovation. How am I setting up this business or this part of Shell for the future? And that is a very vague part of innovation.
ये नई यूनिट है?
ये एक relatively नया unit है. There are parts of it which were older,
Okay.
but parts of it are newer, and the newer parts have a lot to do with what Shell's responses to the climate change equation. Agriculture and forestry is the vertical that I look after now. There are 14 verticals in Shell. Agriculture and forestry is one of them. Agriculture and forestry accounts for 25% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide.
Okay.
The world's agriculture and forestry sector is responsible for 25%. Now, that's counterintuitive. A lot of people would say, really? We thought agriculture would be... But, so we were talking about rice production right now. Rice production is very high on methane. So greenhouse gas emissions are there are 6 different types of gases. Carbon dioxide is the most prominent one that people talk about. But methane is the big one, right? Livestock, rice, these are big emitters of methane, which is CH4, and that is contributes towards the greenhouse gas emissions. So a lot of my work is that how do we mitigate against that? And इसके अंदर fertilizer का भी एक aspect आ जाता है, इसके अंदर bio-refining का एक aspect आ जाता है कि sustainable aviation fuels when they're made from food feedstock, bio feedstock, sustainable aviation fuel है, renewable diesel है, ethanol है. Shell also has one of the biggest sugarcane plantations in the world near Sao Paulo in Brazil.
Okay.
So that's
उधर क्या ये ethanol बनाते हैं?
Ethanol. There are 23 ethanol plants over here that we. So it's a very diverse part. So there's the performance of all of these assets, but also the transform about how are we set for the future. Carbon credit trading is a very important part of this.
So lots of opportunity to make change and do innovations.
That's right.
And that's, I guess, a key kind of leadership imperative and prerequisite to be successful as a leader.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one of the questions that fascinates me when I've worked a lot with customers and partners for most of my life. And a fundamental question now that I work a lot at the boardroom level with customers and I get invited in, a fundamental question that I like to ask and I love to hear the answer is, how do you manage innovation? And chances are 9 out of 10 times, it'll be a difficult question to answer. Because how does the pharma industry manage innovation is very interesting. I mean, is it in R&D? Is it from the sales force? Is it a hybrid of the two? In the oil industry, a lot of the innovation, where is it coming from? Is it the R&D centers? We were talking about R&D and the troika of public sector, private sector, and institutions triangulating into the right answer and taking it forward. Where is it? And the answer, how innovation is managed is a very, very important part of the equation. So a lot of my time is spent on how do we do, how do we manage that, and also fail fast, because coming back to the concept of failure, if something fails, I mean, don't be so wedded to the idea that aapne har haal mein usko karana hai. But say that it's a, and by the way, I mean, the other thing I also want to mention just on this point is that we must not be married to our solutions. We must be married to the problem. Otherwise, hota ye hai ki, we come up with a solution and then we try it all over the place. And, we keep on trying it. It's a, square peg in a round hole, but we'll keep on doing it because it's our solution. But we really need to concentrate on the problem.
और आई थिंक इससे लिंक्ड आपने क्लाइमेट की बात की, बट देयर आर अदर बिग चैलेंजेस इन पाकिस्तान एज वेल एज इन द वर्ल्ड. आई मीन हमारे यहाँ जो चैलेंजेस हैं, लाइक पॉवर्टी का चैलेंज है, इस वक्त जो मेल्ट डाउन का चैलेंज है, इट्स ऑल्सो रिक्वायर्स लीडरशिप. जेंडर का इशू है. I want to link this with what you said earlier in our meeting when you said oil companies get a really bad rap. So to mitigate that and to deal with it, how do companies like yours deal with it? And obviously, as a global leader, what's your role and what's your take on this?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And that is obviously a question very close to my heart and anybody who works in the oil industry, because, for anybody to work, नौकरी हम इसीलिए करते हैं because we want a sense of purpose. नौकरी क्या? We exist for a sense of purpose. And a company like Shell is very strong on ethics and ethos and contribution. So obviously this is very close to heart, because it is when something like that happens, it is when somebody asks this question, they are inadvertently saying that we don't believe your intentions are. So this is something that we take very, very seriously, and we talk about this all the time. Shell has had a very long history. Most of the Seven Sisters, which are comprise the oil industry, 120, 130-year history. There have been different societal imperatives in that period. Different things were important at different times. But I mean, Shell currently, there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that its entire management philosophy is around really a greener future. If last year, if I look at all the capex and opex, $20 billion were committed to clean tech and a greener solution, which is a very large part of Shell's investment base. I think that, I mean, there are obviously many detractors who say that, I mean, well, what is the future? I mean, where are you going? And we're not in places like coal, or we're not in things like that at the moment. And a lot of our energies are being spent in biorefining and in solar and in gas, in LNG. So there's a lot of work happening in that space.
So you're diversifying away from fossil fuels over time.
We have diversified away from fossil fuels because we feel that that is not only where the future is, but that is where the future should be.
और इसमें leadership एक तो मतलब है ना, corporate group as a community, but from your vantage point, how have you kind of transitioned? Because it's a very different mindset now for oil company leaders, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think, and part of this is also educating ourselves, right? I mean, I came into the oil industry in 1994.
Okay.
Since 1994, I mean, it's there have been so many data points that we've learned about climate change and what's happening, what is not, what works, what doesn't. I think that, I mean, one of the things that has become very obvious is that we are all complicit in this. Whether you're a producer or a consumer, complicity is the name of the game. And we need to join up to be able to. उस हवाले से तो आप ये भी कह सकते हैं, पाकिस्तान जो है, it is less than 1% of contributor, actually to be exact, 0.9% contributor to global greenhouse gases. Yet, it is in the top 10 countries which are going to bear the fallout. Glaciers melting, the displacement that we saw. I mean, this is a mammoth challenge right now. But so, I mean, Pakistan, we can say this is not our problem in the making, but everybody's complicit. We need to really change the way that we live and produce and consume. And that penny has to drop for everybody.
और because you're chair of the board of Shell Pakistan,
जी.
तो इस national level पे भी कोई आप are you kind of spearheading the
Yeah, so there's a lot of work that is happening in that space. To name a few,
जी
first of all, we take our HSSE obligations extremely seriously, and उसके अंदर जो है emissions control is a part of that, because the E is the environment, and that has been there for a long time. Then we've talked in the power spectrum. We've talked about the move to EV. Electrical vehicle. Shell is leading that charge in Pakistan,
so
as
are
it is
we,
globally.
right?
As are you, and your innovation center. Today we were there. We were
Yes.
looking at that. So that is a very big part of that. The third thing that my own team is actually doing over here. So from my global agri and forestry hat on, there's some work we are doing in conjunction with Cargill around biochar.
Okay.
Biochar is a very interesting. I don't know if you know what that is, but it works together with fertilizer to reduce water runaway and nutrient retention in soil. And as you get closer and closer to the Indus, and जाके आपका gradient ज़्यादा आ जाता है, it's very difficult to retain vitality in soil. Now the same by the same token, the smog is becoming a big issue across the Haryana belt from East Punjab to West Punjab, because farmers are burning the stock in the ground to clear the land.
Right.
So what we want to do is actually be able to find a mechanism to procure that stock in the ground, and use a system called pyrolysis that we have, which is at very high in the absence of oxygen, heating at 800 degrees centigrade or more, to create biochar that can, the same stock can be converted to biochar that can become this fertilizer aid.
Okay.
So from a circularity point of view, there's a smog issue that you're addressing, there's a fertilizer vitality issue that you're addressing, and also doing it in a circular fashion for the local economies. So that is such an interesting homegrown thing that we are, and by the way, we are piloting that in Pakistan to see if, and then we're going to take it to other parts of the world.
तो आप मतलब grand challenges से कर रहे हैं. You're taking a leadership role and also trying to be innovative on the technology front. Naufil Daud.
Assalamu alaikum ji.
Naufil, MBA class of 2003. Thank you very much for some of your very insightful comments. I was most intrigued when I got the email, because head of forestry and agriculture in Shell, I just thought that public health for Philip Morris or British American Tobacco probably, but I now stand more educated as you've spoken about. I want to make us rather emotionally charged, not very controversial aspect with your progression as a leader in your company.
Ji, ji.
Greenhouse gases, climate change, big oil, emotionally very charged topic, rather not controversial. And you've spoken about some decision points and the risks that you've taken as you've grown in your company. My question is that as a leader, this context, did it ever put a challenge to you on the ethical structure at all, if it did? And were you able to make the right choices, or were you provided with a framework to make those right choices as you grew up? Because at your level, these are the big questions which people ask all the time. So thank you.
Thanks, Naufil. Thank you very much. And if I may ask, where are you working? Are you associated with LUMS still, or?
No, I work in a bank.
Okay. No, thank you for that question, and that's a heavy question. So if I was to break it up into two parts, the answer, I mean, the first part is that has it factored into my decision about staying with the company or in the sector? I would say that since 2006 is when I actively started thinking about this. And again, I would think about that. And if I'd come to the conclusion that I was working in a company that was not committed to making a change, then I would have left the company. So I had come to this early conclusion, and by the way, I still keep on looking out that, I mean, what are the data points I can find that कि call or fail में कोई तज़ाद तो नहीं है? Are we really walking the talk? And very happy to report out that it's very, very unified. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of that. I'm also a little bit, and you were right to say that it's an emotional question and you want to take the sting of the emotion out when answering this. But it's very difficult to do that because when you know what you know, but there's a little bit of a lambasting happening externally, so then that hurts. And but anyway, I mean, you keep your shoulder to the wheel and you keep on trying to demonstrate by exhibiting the right things and outcomes, which we hope to do and we continue to do. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the if I got your question right, was that how have I felt that the company has provided me with the latitude to make the right decision and the tools to actually even find out what the latitude is. Shell as a company has never ever asked me, and this is not only the environment but ethics and compliance, to do the wrong thing. It's a very, very ethically compliant company. It will always err on the side of caution. In many ways, it's thought of. It's a very conservative company, you can also say, and a lot of people have said that you can be a little, but you can be a little more risk-taking, but commercially risk-taking. Ethics and compliance ke upar there is absolutely zero compromise, and the environment comes into the same domain. And there have been times when there have been calls that have had to be made, and 100% of the time, Shell has been extremely proactive in saying that, all right, declare, what do we do? How do we reach out to, so it's always been very, very above board. Does that do justice to your question? Or?
Yeah, so as a follow-up question, you were lucky, but for somebody else in a senior leadership position, this does become a challenge, provided those similar choices or options are not available. So as a senior leader, we must recognize that these are some of the hard choices that we also have to make on the ethical spectrum as well.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I think that you're right. I mean, there is no doubt about that.
There's one more, and we'll get back on track. Zara, concise question पूछेगा.
I'm Mohammed Awais and I work as a researcher in Center for Water here. I'm wondering when you say you are diverting from fossil fuels, so are you like, or is the company stopping like the oil digging or so? And also, I think climate activists globally, accuse Shell of they knew about the consequences of oil digging back in 1980s, but they still continue digging. So how do you see that also?
If I was to, so when you say oil digging, you mean refining, or do you mean exploring for oil?
Yeah, and also, I mean, also climate activists or like environmentalists say, for example, oil exploration sites also cause environmental damages, such as in the South African delta.
I see. In the Niger Delta, right. So first of all, I mean, the Paris Accord in 2015 actually was globally the first time. I mean, there was a lot of dialogue and debate happening from the 80s onwards, and in the 90s and the early 2000s, but there was no conclusive evidence that was coming one way or the other around aspects of, because this is a very nuanced debate, right? I mean, can you, where do you mine for oil? Where do you refine oil? Where do you use alternatives, etc.? It was 2015 when, in the Paris Accord, where the world came to a conclusion that the greenhouse gas emissions need to be reduced, and they actually put a temperature cap around that. They said that we have to be at 1.5 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial levels, right? So pre-industrial revolution levels. If we go anywhere above 1.5 degrees centigrade, the polar caps are going to start melting. The sea rise, really, it was, I mean, where there was a lot of competing information and data before that, it was really around that period where in Kyoto and in Paris where these accords came in, and Shell had recognized this earlier. It had made its footprint more gas friendly, as a part of that, in the in the 20, I can't remember the year. I think it was 2011 or 2012, where it skewed its portfolio more towards gas instead of oil by buying British gas. There was you must know, you're nodding. I mean, so that was a very big acquisition, and it was that was really bringing and gas, of course, is a lot more environmentally friendly as compared to oil. So the portfolio shift had started since then. When you talk about Africa, there were many learnings over the years. In the Niger Delta, there was Shell. The crude over there is Bonny Light, and Bonny crude that comes from there. It had been operating for a long time. There was a lot of remediation done, but at the same time, there was a lot of fence line communication management, etc., that needed to be done. That goes part and parcel when you're operating in these sorts of environments. So I mean, that was there. There were many learnings for Shell, and as we went along. So these were some of the things. Is that all right? Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you. तो कुछ देर पहले आपने कहा कि नौकरी हम करते हैं पर्पस के लिए, और यहाँ जहाँ हम बैठे हैं जिस एनवायरनमेंट में, और जो आपने देखी भी पहले, यहाँ जो बच्चे आते हैं वो नौकरी नहीं करना चाहते, वो बनना चाहते हैं सरमायादार. तो the question for you is, does corporate life lend itself to being entrepreneurial?
So now I'm missing Mr. Razak Daud, because I would love to leverage his immense experience around this. So let's get back to first principles over here, right? I mean, the first conventional wisdom is that, I mean, people who are in corporations tend to be not entrepreneurial, black and white, and business people who are entrepreneurial, join businesses right from the get-go,
Right.
and they do a lot of commercially, hardcore commercial skills are imbued over there. And I suppose there is some truth to that. I mean, but iske andar risk taking ka zyada element aa jata hai, as opposed to what you learn. All good corporations are going to be made of people who are entrepreneurial. In fact, I'm going to pick on a discipline, and it's always dangerous to do that. Okay, let me pick on chartered accountants. They're safe.
Okay.
If you want a good finance manager, must be a good commercial finance manager. Chartered accountants are of course very skilled people, but I mean, the best finance people who have been chartered accountants, of course many have been MBAs as well, have been people who are commercially savvy and entrepreneurial. So I think that I would challenge conventional wisdom that a good corporation is going to be made up of entrepreneurial people. Now, the reason that if Mr. Daud was here, I would ask him the question that entrepreneur तो खाली टॉप पे होता है, नौकरी पेशा तो वो भी हायर करते हैं. तो अगर वो वैसा कल्चर नहीं इम्ब्यू करेंगे, तो that entire business model cannot be sustained.
So you're saying you can't have a venture full of entrepreneurs. There have to be some worker bees.
Well, yeah, entrepreneurial skills have to do is different to. I mean, the worker bees is a important thing as well but that's more of a leadership sort of a thing.
Right. Okay, so we're winding down, and I want to ask you, like, do leaders relax? What do you do for leisure? Because so far what you described in the last, it's like a whirlwind of activity, jetting around, and ethanol and methanol, and how do you relax?
Yeah, so I relax quite a bit actually.
Okay.
I love sports. So by the way, every morning, come rain, hail or shine, 30 minutes of exercise is and this has been my regime since university. I've kept that up. I felt that a healthy body is a very, very important part and we've talked a lot about work. Actually, I mean, it's a really key question that you've asked. Work is only one part of your life.
Okay.
We need to have a balanced life. Uske andar friendships bhi hai, social angle bhi hai, health bhi hai, spirituality bhi hai, soul searching bhi hai. It is very important to balance these elements out. So I mean, for me, I mean, some of the things I do, I'm a big reader. So I read a lot, particularly history. I enjoy The one magazine that I've read religiously since school actually has been The Economist. I can't wait for the next edition to come out. I will always have that. I will always read that. But I'm going to also come back to the sense of purpose again.
Okay.
We touched upon work-life balance in an earlier conversation, and I've often been asked that. I mean, how do you frequently traveling a lot, long days, long nights? How do you manage your work life? And of course, I mean, there are many ways of doing it, and we will all have our own ways that we do it. But I often say that if my mind goes out to, so when I read, I do a lot of military history reading as well.
Really?
And I'm intrigued by soldiers, no matter which soldier, from which part of the world. Because soldiers have a certain ethos. They're not paid very well, and they step across borders to give up their lives. Or even they're the ones जो हमने displacement की बात की, they were the first ones to jump into Indus to,
And look at them, the video from Turkey yesterday.
Outstanding, isn't it?
The
just look at
search
that.
and rescue unit, what they're doing there.
It's outstanding.
Yeah.
And these people are not paid a lot of money,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's generally, they're not paid a lot of money. But at the same time, what motivates them to step into a minefield? उनके भी बीवी बच्चे हैं भाई, उनके यहाँ के husband बच्चे हैं, यहाँ के, it's what inspires these people, what motivates these people, and that is sense of purpose.
Right.
That's fundamentally they believe in what they're doing is right, and I think that it is so important to find. So if you have a sense of purpose, actually, difficult situations become easy because you have a North Star that you are going to. And if you don't have that, even 2 days, 2 hours at work is too much. It is so onerous, you don't want to get out of bed. And I've seen situations where people say that just can't get out of bed to go to work. So it's not about the number of hours, or it's about what do you believe in, and then follow.
Sense of purpose. So I was going to actually give you the last word, but I think that was the last word. So I think that's the perfect way to end this. I want to really thank you for your candor and for really opening up and sharing your life's experiences. I want to thank the organizers, the advancement team, and also NIC for letting us use their venue. And I will now invite our Vice Chancellor, Dr. Arshad Ahmed, if you want to share a few final thoughts.
Sure, my pleasure.
Ajay.
Want to take a look at the audience and thank them as well. First of all, for your participation, of course, for your questions. आवाज मेरी काफी इसीलिए तो मुझे use thank you very much. Really appreciate your participation and questions in particular, and thank you, Mac, for facilitating and orchestrating a wonderful set of questions and conversation. I really learned a lot from your responses in particular. And I have to tell you, first of all, I am a proud grammarian. and it links very much with some of the takeaways you heard today, particularly about failure, because whenever we used to come to Lahore and it was always about sports, we used to lose. And I think one of the great lessons about failure is that if you do reflect on it, which is the only way to learn from it, is to have that very private conversation, usually with yourself. Because sometimes you can share with this person or that, but if you regularly do it, you're reflecting on your experience, especially on the failures. And one of the things I've learned from being with good leaders is that they don't make the same mistake twice. So it's important that if you're in a similar situation, then you're going to do things differently and not do the same thing again, which I think is a great message from you, as is the message about health. I think we talk about the importance of education. It's really critical for, of course, a university like ours and the role we play in what seems to be a huge landscape where hopefully there'll be more LUMS and more institutions of impact. But health really comes even before education. We don't have health, we don't have. And the message to the audience, I think, is clear that you don't get a good night's sleep, let alone sports activity, you're not going to have a good day. You're just going to have a difficult day. But with sports, there's something amazing that happens that allows you to, as you say, discover yourself and others around you. That's a great message for all of us. I also wanted to say thanks to Shell for being a founding partner and member on the board when LUMS came into existence 35 years ago. Been very generous in supporting scholarships, and a lot of time it's to talk about how we can do things better, which is really what we talked about for the last hour before we came here. Very specific interventions that they're interested in, we're interested in, whether it's water or energy, agriculture, and so on. And that's really the point I want to emphasize, that हम लोग बोलते ज़्यादा है कि industry के साथ काम करना है, and we need to build bridges, and we need to have more than conversations, and that's some of the things that we have experienced with Shell, and we hope to continue doing that so that we can do our part, whether it's R&D or whether it's trying to come up with as close as we can to commercialization and then leave it in your good hands. But my goodness, did we learn a lot in this short time period, and I'm so grateful to
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Pleasure.
And thank you
sir.
very much.
My pleasure.